all that you are, you will have to suffer the consequences for that. You belong to him. You owe him every bit of you. Every single bit. There's not one bit of you that you do not owe him. And to withhold any bit of you from him and to aim it at anything else is nothing less than idolatry. The reason I say that is because as we move into this book and we move into this passage in Ecclesiastes chapter 1, the author, whose name is Solomon, he's going to point out three things that are the desire of every single human heart in this room. Three things: satisfaction, meaning, and a legacy. We say that again. Satisfaction, meaning, and legacy. You want that and you need that. That is sown into the human DNA that we cannot go on without it. Everything that we do is aimed at receiving that. And so here's where the dilemma comes in. If we try to get that out of anything other than Christ and only Christ, then we're taking a God-given desire and aiming it at an illegitimate source, which is idolatry. I want you to understand the message I want to talk about tonight might be one of the most important messages for your entire life. I want to be very honest about that. And what direction you're going to aim the rest of your life at the age you are right now. Are you going to waste your life? That's an important question. And so I'm going to go through this sort of verse by verse with some chunks in there. But it's 11 verses, and I'm just going to read them one by one. I'm not going to read the whole chunk and then go back and visit it. Okay? So Ecclesiastes chapter 1, starting in verse 1, Solomon introduces himself without saying his name, but if you know biblical history, you know who it is. He says, "These are the words of the teacher, King David's son, who ruled Jerusalem." Now, to some that may seem irrelevant, but let me ask you this. Who's a really famous person right now? Say that, who? Jake Paul.
No, do Robert Pattinson. Do that. He's a Batman.
Yes. Kanye West.
Kanye West. Let's do that. Kanye West. All right. If I was up here speaking about life versus Kanye West up here speaking about life, here's what I can promise you. Love him or hate him, I don't care what your opinion is of him. If Kanye West was here, we'd have way more people in this room listening intently. It's true. It's a sad reality, but it's true. Now, why do I say that? Because when he introduces himself as the teacher, King David's son, he's pointing out two very important factors for the original readers of this letter. One, I'm the son of King David. If you know anything about King David, you know that he was the second king of Israel, the true good king of Israel, that he defeated mass quantities of armies to set the people of Israel free from oppression, that he wrote a very large part of the book of Psalms, and that he's considered to be a man after God's own heart. Solomon's the son of him. You know who Solomon is? Solomon is considered still to this day to be the wealthiest man to ever live in history. Wealthiest man to ever live in history, King Solomon. He was so wise in his days that people traveled from all around the known world just to come and sit and listen to him speak. He actually built one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. When Solomon introduces himself right here, he's throwing his status out there really quick so that everyone who's reading can understand who is talking. And that's important because what you need to know about Solomon, listen, if I was the wealthiest and one of the most powerful men in the entire planet, I would have the ability to do just about anything I want. Am I wrong? You know what we're going to learn? You know what you'll learn? You read the book of Ecclesiastes, you know what you learn really quickly? Solomon tried every single thing. Says it. He says it. He says, I intentionally set out to be the most hedonistic psychopath on the planet. He had 300 wives and 700 concubines. That's more sex than imaginable. He threw parties that you could not even begin. Listen, take everybody in the celebrity world right now and try and throw the biggest bash you could imagine in the nation of America. And Solomon, that was like a little block party for Solomon. That was a weekend shindig. This dude legitimately tried it all, tasted it all, did it all. And so here's what I would say, right? We always say that wisdom comes with experience. Am I right? Would you want to listen to somebody who has a ton of experience in the avenues of life? And I would argue this is probably one dude we should listen to his experience. What is he going to tell us about life in this passage? Because here's what I'm going to tell you. This passage is him telling you about your life. And so he's going to share with us wisdom about life. And here's where he begins in sharing his wisdom. Verse 2. Everything is meaningless, says the teacher. Completely meaningless. Ooh, that'll suck the wind out of you right there. And it's funny, listen, we want to take that, we'll go, well, what he really means, no, he means exactly that. Everything is meaningless, completely meaningless. Now, the literal translation would mean vanity. That everything is vanity, all is vanity. But what exactly does vanity mean? Well, in the Hebrew, the word actually has an image that comes with it when you use the word vanity. And here's what that is. If you were to go outside tonight when it's 40-something degrees and breathe, what's going to happen? Well, steam's going to come out of your mouth. How long is that steam going to last? That's what everything in life is. It's a vapor of breath into the cold air. That's how pleasureful it is. That's how lasting it'll be. Right? That's what he's telling us. There's another image that comes along with it as he continues on later on in chapter 1, which we're not going to read that today, but he would ultimately say this. It's like chasing the wind, and here's what that means. It means, how many of you have ever seen like a cumulonimbus cloud? Right? They're gigantic, fluffy ones. They look like a big cotton ball.
Yeah, that one.
Right? Like you don't know, Riggs. She's somewhat smart.
Did anyone know that word?
Yes.
Yeah, see? TJ knew. If you were to walk outside, okay, and there's a thunderstorm coming, speak Riggs language, there's a thunderstorm coming, and you see a big puffy cloud up in the air. Now she's laughing. So let's say you go, you know what? That cloud looks soft, I want to hug it. And so somehow you blimp up there into the sky, and you approach this cloud, and you put out your arms to hug it, and you close your arms, and there's nothing in it. That's what everything in this life is. It's an image of something so great that does not deliver. Everything in this life. Everything. James chapter 4 verse 14 says this, your life is like the morning fog. It is here a little while, then it is gone. Now that it really kind of has a double meaning, because he does literally mean your life. Like if you think about it in the span of just the history of the world, however old the stupid thing is, you're a blip on the radar of time. You understand that? You're a blip. You would not even be a visible line onside the timeline of the earth. Your life is but a vapor. It is but the morning fog. But not only that, how much effect does the morning fog, or really the real translation, your life is but a vapor, how much actual impact does a vapor have on anything? None. You know what he's saying? You toil and you labor for nothing. What does he categorize as meaningless? Everything. And let me remind you really quickly, who's saying this? Someone who's tried all of it. And I'm not talking about me. I haven't tried all of it. I've tried a lot of it. And I can agree, everything I've tried has been meaningless. But Solomon's tried all of it, and he says it's meaningless. But, let me make a clarification that Solomon's fixing to make. There is a targeted area of meaningless in this life. Targeted area, right? And I know some of you are like, okay, what is it? Because I want to aim toward the non-targeted things, right? Verse 3. What do people get for all the hard work, all their hard work under the sun? What's the targeted area? Under the sun. Everything in your life on this earth. In other words, here's what he's saying, and this is a key phrase. All throughout the book of Ecclesiastes, you're going to see this repetitious phrase, under the sun, under the sun, under the sun, right? And ultimately what he's talking about is all the pursuits that you have in this life. Let me be very clear with you right now. Now, again, under the sun, that's important, and we'll get there. Your school, your career, your spouse, your kids, all of it. All of it. Joe. All of it. And now let me go ahead and make a clarification. For some of you guys who are going, okay, what does this under the sun means? Here's what he means. Living a life and aiming all your pursuits at that life without having an eternal perspective. In other words, there is a life after this life. If you're focusing all your life on this life and not the one to come, it's meaningless. It's vanity. It's empty. You are running around day after day, hugging a cloud that is not there. No, there's no purpose to it. There's nothing. Hence the verse we went over 2 weeks ago. Matthew chapter 16, verse 26. What do you benefit if you gain the whole world but lose your own soul? Is there anything worth more than a soul? And yet, we read that. Listen, guys, here's what I know. I read that, and you guys are like, yeah, that's right. But you're not living like it's right. You're not living like that's true. You know how I know that you're not? Because I find in myself this hindrance of being able to live that way. As much as I agree with this, as much as I teach it, what do I continue to find? I continue to find myself thinking, Daniel, once you finally finish this one thing, then finally you'll feel like you're blank. If you could just get out of this one place, or if you could just get with this one group, or if you could just get this one job, or if you could get on this one stage, or if you could teach in this one way, finally, everything would be great. And yet all of it still falls under the category meaningless. If that's all the pursuit is, it's meaningless. Why? What makes it so meaningless? And you have to remember, the point of this is that thing that every one of you in this room, including myself, are hungering after, which is satisfaction, meaning, and a legacy. That's what we want more than anything. What makes this so meaningless? Why is it so meaningless? If you recall the story in Genesis chapter 3 when Adam first sinned, right? Adam brought sin into the world. Once Adam sinned, Adam brought sin into the world. But here's the thing, consequences followed that. Consequences followed that. Now I'm going to read out of Genesis 3 really quickly what some of those consequences were, and bear with me. Genesis chapter 3, verses 16 through 19. Then he, being God, said to the woman, so ladies in the room, speaking to you, he said to the woman, I will sharpen the pain of your pregnancy, and in pain you will give birth. And you will desire to control your husband, but he will rule over you. You know what he's saying? He's saying, one, the most celebratory, life-giving thing you should have ever been able to possibly imagine, which is bringing life into this world, will now be filled with pain and turmoil. Celebration after. But during, it will be wrenching pain, and it is taking many lives. It's dangerous at times. It was not meant to be that way. But because sin entered the world, it is. And you know, secondly, this is going to go against every cultural grain in your body, and I'm okay with that. Ladies, you were created to be held and cherished and loved and valued to such a high esteem by a man who wants to protect you completely and entirely and fight for you and provide for you in everything. And I will say this, the most mentally, spiritually healthy women I have ever met in my entire life are women who have a man who leads well over them in that exact way. But you know what this does? You know what God says? Because sin entered the world, instead you'll want to control your husband. Now, we can make women jokes and men jokes all day long, but the reality is this is what you tend to find happening. And it doesn't help, and I'll be very honest, it doesn't help when you find men who have no idea how to be a leader, who have no idea how to be a man. They're just a little boy trying to flex their muscles. It's unfortunate. I'm going to be dead honest, man. It's one of the most unfortunate things for me. And this is something I struggle with really bad. Is looking at a lot of young girls, young women, who are actually pursuing Jesus while men are just sleeping on the sidelines. You're a disgrace, man. You should count your manhood cheap. So what follows? And he, being God, said to the man, since you listened to your wife and you ate from the fruit of the tree that I commanded you not to eat, the ground is cursed because of you. All your life you will struggle to scratch a living from it. It will grow thorns and thistles for you, though you will eat of its grain. By the sweat of your brow will you have food to eat, until you return to the ground from which you were made. For you were made from dust, and to dust you will return. You know what he's saying? He's saying, men, you were created for nobility, for honor, to work, to guard, to protect, and to love doing it. To love doing it. To be cultivating the earth and to be cultivating a relationship with your wife and your family. And to be loving. You would be loving it every single minute of it. But because sin came into the world, you know what you get instead? Barely paid for the work you put in. Laborious, by the sweat of your brow, the most unpleasant thing on the entire planet you'll be doing just to get enough food to eat. All your work will seem utterly meaningless because you'll put so much effort in and get so little in return. And then when you were created for glory, instead you'll just return to the dust. What do people get for all their hard work under the sun? Exhaustion, misery, hopelessness, resentment, depression. You aim your whole life at under the sun, it's all you'll get in return. That's it. Solomon then takes us another step in proving his point. Listen, that's just his thesis statement, right? Now he's going to prove his point. And in order to do it, he's going to take us to the created order. Listen to what he says, verses 4 through 7. Generations come and generations go, but the earth never changes. The sun rises and the sun sets, then hurries around to rise again. The wind blows to the south, then turns to the north. Around and around it goes, blowing in circles. Rivers run to the sea, but the sea is never full. Then the water returns again to the rivers and flows again to the sea. You know what he's doing? He's giving you a series of very poetic expressions. And the first thing he says is people come and people go and no lasting effect takes place. Right? That should be a painful pill for you to swallow. That in the large timeline of history, assuming this world goes on for another few thousand years, which I doubt it will, but if it does, you won't even make a dent. Watch the sun. What does it do? Comes around in the east. You think maybe something's going to change? Back over there, just to do it again the next day. You go, oh, the seasons change, just to start back over again. Redundant, repetitive cycle. What does the wind do? Blows around and around the globe. It never escapes, never comes in, never gets stronger, never nothing. It's just the same. It's just inertia. What do the rivers do? They flow constantly into the sea, but all their labor of flowing never fills the sea up. Instead, floats up in the clouds, goes back up to land, pours out, river flows again. Same cycle, over and over and over. How many of y'all remember how Einstein defined insanity?
Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result.
Woohoo! That's it! I almost think that Einstein was reading Ecclesiastes when he came up with that. And if you look at the whole created order, it's doing the same exact thing. There's vanity and there's toil in everything that was created. You know what's interesting about that? You know what Paul says about the creation? Romans 8:20, against its will, all creation was subjected to God's curse. Why? Because the man who was put in charge of it failed to lead over it well. Do you know why it hurts so bad to live in this planet? To see the destruction, the chaos, everything, to see all of it. You know why it hurts so bad? Because it's not what you were intended for. We were created for something so much better. And what makes me the most sick is how often I'm including myself in this, how often we look at these other nations, we look at these other people, we look at what they do and the bad decisions and all these various things, and we point the finger at how terrible they are. All the while, we just spin our wheels, just aiming in a different direction that's just as meaningless. Maybe it destroys them a little faster than it destroys you, so you get a couple more years of misery. Now, y'all look sad, you should be, right? There's something else you're going to notice in this little series of poems that he gives us. There's also a harmony, where each thing is working for something else. It's what we call an ecology. Yeah, the sun does the same exact thing every day, but if it stopped, the earth would die, as would we. Yeah, the rivers repeat the same thing over and over and over, but they're serving another purpose. You see, if you notice how all this works, the winds, all of it. Everything they're doing is to serve something else. Now here's where the downside comes in, back to the vanity. All those things that they're serving, they fade away as well. And yet, in its limited existence, it spends its time for something other than itself. I think that's interesting. Why don't we? Wouldn't you say that marks us off as probably the most wretched of all creation? When you notice everything else serving a purpose for something else other than us? And now you begin to see where this whole idea hones in on under the sun. The point is not that if you look out at the trees, man, that's just vanity. The point is that your pursuits are absolute vanity. Because you aim them at all the wrong things. And so that's where we come into what I would consider to be really our first point, satisfaction. Verse 80 says this, everything is wearisome beyond description. No matter how much we see, we are never satisfied. No matter how much we hear, we are never content. In other words, you have a very insatiable desire. Your heart is hungry for something. You want to be satisfied with something. You do. What do you do when you're bored? TikTok? Sleep? Somebody said sleep?
Go to the gym.
Go to the gym? Anybody else? Eat? Matthew eats. Can't tell, but he eats. Why do I say that? Because you cannot handle just sitting there doing nothing. You need satisfaction. You're looking for something to pass your time, something to amuse your brain, something to leave you in awe, something to give you a little skip of joy or some kind of feeling, so you're not just sitting there numbly staring at a blank wall. You're craving satisfaction. You're absolutely hungry for it. But now, a lot of you guys are still young. Here's what I can promise you. No matter what you see, no matter what you experience, no matter what you hear, no matter what you watch, you're only gonna want more. None of it is actually gonna land. None of it. Spoiler alert. You're gonna be so excited for it. Even for me, like when I think about vacations now, I'm like, oh, it's gonna be awesome. I'm gonna go to Costa Rica. And then before I even leave, all I'm thinking is, yeah, but I'm just going to return back here again. Right? That's all I can think about. Why? Because that's the reality of the situation. You can go, well, just don't think about it. Ignore reality? That's senseless. That's just as vain. That's just as hopeless. Why am I telling you this? In hopes that maybe, oh, just maybe, you won't be one of those people that gets into your early 20s and you're like, man, I just don't feel alive enough, so I need to go and do random and impulsive things all the time to feel alive. That's not going to give you life. It's just going to make you broke. You can, listen, you can go do all the fun things in the world. You can go do all the experience in the world. You can go get all the achievements in the world, right? I shared this with y'all a few weeks ago. For those of you who know who Chris Bumstead is, he's quite possibly, I would argue, the greatest classic bodybuilder on the planet, maybe will be in all of history. And you know what he said after his first medal and his continuing medals that he's gotten? After the stage lights go off, it doesn't matter anymore. That moment doesn't last forever. There's no lasting satisfaction. It's nothing. The curtains close, on to the next day. The end. Only a fool would attempt to live in that glory yesterday. How many of y'all here have washed up high school athletes? You know what those people are? And I'm not trying to rag on them, I'm just saying in reality. Those are people who feel like their life isn't equaling out to much, and so they're trying to pursue their old glory days again and impress everybody with them. You've got an insatiable desire to be in awe. The problem is you have an absolute inability to fill it. Because there's nothing here to do it. Nothing. Proverbs chapter 27 verse 20 says this, hell and destruction are never full, so the eyes of man are never satisfied. Man, I'm begging you now. Whatever the thing is that you just keep trying to cling on to in hopes that it's going to offer you something, please just stop. The outcome will be emptiness, it will be hopelessness, and it will be resentment. It will. Some of you, and I know I've worked in youth ministry long enough to see a lot of young people get married. You know what's really interesting about it? How many times leading into the marriage, I tell them, hey, this isn't going to be the ultimate satisfaction for you. right? This is actually going to be more struggle and more problems and more pain. There's going to be some beautiful moments, but it's still going to be very difficult. And they're like, oh, yeah. And then a year into marriage, you know what you end up hearing? They're struggling hard. And you know what a lot of the reason is? One of the two people, usually, had way too much expectation on the other person to meet a lot of desires they could never actually meet. And I don't just mean sexually. I mean emotionally. And so what happened is that person that had these high demands, pressures and pressures and pressures, needing more and more out of the person they can't deliver. And they end up crushing this person with expectation. They fold and they break. For some of you, maybe that's not marriage, but I promise you it's something. Whether it's career, whether it's friendships, whether it's parties, whatever it is. I know growing up as a non-believer, that was part of my thing. Once I graduated high school, the party was over. I was like, now what? I gotta get an actual job, right? But I really loved to party. And so I tried to keep partying on the weekends, but the problem is all my friends were growing up. So what did I do? I resorted to being that 21-year-old going to high school parties. I really did, I know. And now I'm that guy trying to relive in the glory days again. Because it was the only place I thought I was going to find anything. And it just left me dry. And it chewed me up and it spit me out. And whatever your thing is, it's going to do the same to you. I promise. If you don't believe me, look at Tom Brady. Prime example. How many times that dude retired? He's got how many rings? Last time he was asked about his 4th or 5th ring, whatever it was, what did he say? I don't know, there's still got to be something out there because this isn't doing it. I'm not trying to rag on the guy, but I feel like that's pretty embarrassing for as accomplished as he is. To have done as much as that dude has done, and to still be that utterly clueless. But how do we respond to it? Right? How do you respond to every disappointment? Everything you've placed so much expectation on, and it is spit back in your face. How do you respond? You know what you do? You do the same thing that I tend to do. Aim it at something different. We're like the most foolish people on the planet. It's like we're standing in a sandbox eating sand trying to get full, wondering why we can't, why it's not appeasing our appetite. So then we stand up, look at another sandbox, and we go, maybe that one will do it. All the while, we've got a 5-course dinner sitting in the middle. We just refuse it over and over and over. Verses 9 and 10, we look at meaning. History merely repeats itself. It has all been done before. Nothing under the sun is truly new. Sometimes people say, here comes something new. But actually it's old. Nothing is ever truly new. You know what he's talking about? He's talking about experience. He's not talking about inventions. He's talking about seeking out an experience of some kind. Something to make you feel like there's a reason you're alive. Some kind of exhilaration. For me, it's usually adrenaline. I've gone skydiving several times. William went with me once. Actually, I guess I went with you, but we went skydiving. I've gone 186 miles an hour on the ground. I've done a lot. And you know what I notice? The adrenaline rush is the exact same every single time. It's no different. Nothing new. I boxed in rings. I've done it. I've done all this stuff. Same adrenaline rush. Nothing different. You know what it leaves me doing? Want another one. Knowing it's not going to be any different. Whatever your little moment of feeling alive is. You tried the first thing, failed. You tried the second, failed. You tried the third, failed. I can promise you about the fourth now. It's going to fail. You're hungering for it. You want to feel alive. going to be a fail. Look, you can bring that into any world you want. I can bring that into my Christian life right now. The amount of times I struggled with thinking I deserved a bigger stage. If I could just get on the breakaway stage, finally I feel like I had a purpose in life. You know what it would do? Fail. It would be nothing. It would leave me nothing. It would do nothing. I don't really care what you aim it at in this life. Where you want to find meaning, you're going to find meaninglessness. And what's sad is we'll be constantly thinking of the next thing. Kills me, man. I'm telling you guys now, see, some of you are like, Daniel, this is not a problem. When you get in your early 20s, it will be, I promise. It always is. It always is. Lastly, we all want to leave a legacy. Verse 11, we don't remember what happened in the past. And in the future generations, no one will remember what we're doing now. Now we can talk all day about, oh, the Daniel, the history books. That's fantastic. The point isn't that. The point is that what you do will not actually have a life-altering, complete, blowout, whatever, right? And now remember, we're talking about pursuits under the sun. Some of you are like, what about Jesus? Who did Jesus live for? Not himself. Right? Pursuits under the sun. Where are they going to leave you? If you want to leave a legacy, they'll leave you without one, I promise you that. Do you know the people who reached some of the highest climaxes of power, such as Nero of Rome? Y'all remember his story? If you've learned anything about Roman history? He got so incredibly bored that he just started slaying and torturing people until he finally killed himself. Most powerful man in the known world. Look at it from every tyrant that ever rose to the top. He got so bored with his power. Just wanting to leave a legacy. But let's do this. Really, I want to bring this home for you guys, right? Let's make it personal. Let's look at our own U.S. presidents really quick. Who was our last president?
Trump.
Who was before him? Who was before him?
Not Clinton.
Bush.
Well, you know what I mean, not terms.
Bush son.
Who was before Obama?
Bush.
Who was before Bush?
Clinton.
Okay. Who was before Clinton?
Daddy Bush. Reagan.
Bush.
What?
Bush.
No, H.W. Bush.
Bush.
Daddy Bush.
Dad Bush.
Dad Bush. Big boy.
Who was before him?
Reagan.
Who was before Reagan?
Carter.
Man, some of y'all got some U.S. history.
I
I think a lot of y'all are like, who was before Carter?
Ford.
Who was before Ford?
Nixon.
Who was before Nixon?
Johnson.
Oh, who was before Johnson?
Kennedy.
Oh my gosh! Okay, I'm done. No, it doesn't. How many of y'all knew that? 3 people in this whole room knew that. Listen. These are the guys that have been ruling our nation over the past 40 or 50 years. And most of you have no idea who they even were. No idea of the order, right? Consider that for a second. Like, how much farther back would it go? How many people have lived entire spans of life? And this is putting it in a very narrow category. Let me tell you how many people in this room are going to be the next president of the United States. Probably none. Maybe William.
No.
Oh, Joe. Okay. Joe and then maybe William. William be VP. But here's the point. It's highly unlikely that you'll have anywhere near the impact that any of those men have had. And you barely remember them. But you think you're going to be so remembered. That your legacy is going to carry on. And what saddens me even more, when you guys graduate, at your graduation speeches, People are just going to fill your heads with all this garbage about how you're going to be world changers, and you're going to carry legacies, and blah, 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 blah. All of it, this self-motivating, dig down within yourself, self-help just to make you something great. And here's the worst part about it. Even if you do, if your pursuit is only under this sun, it will be utterly meaningless for you in the end. You'll return to the dust from where you came. As you know, there's only one way you'll find all of this men. But he didn't come from under our sun. He came from outside of it. God in the flesh, Jesus Christ, born as a man, lived the perfect life we couldn't. In other words, a life wholly lived out for the Father and wholly lived out for you. And then he laid down his life. He died on the cross, paying the debt for our selfishness, for our idol seeking, for all of our vanity. And he purchased us into a life of redemption. And do you know what we have in that? According to Scripture, when we believe the message of Jesus Christ, we receive the Holy Spirit, we're reconciled to God. Do you know who God is? Do you know what the Spirit is? The Spirit of God, according to Jesus, is a fountain that goes deep within our hearts and bubbles up living water. What is water? It's something to quench your thirst, something to offer you satisfaction. Jesus says that he's the true bread that came down from heaven. What is bread? It is satiating food. Do you see that in Jesus what we have is real, lasting satisfaction? That in Jesus Christ you have legitimate meaning, finally, for the first time ever. Because you've been redeemed in Christ. What you do can actually matter. Outside of him, you're only living for you. But redeemed in him, one, you're living for the only one who actually deserves glory. But two, Christ's own love in you should be driving you into an outwardly focused life. And then what follows that is a legacy. And though you may have no legacy here on this earth, he promises great rewards for those who follow him and labor for him. These three heartfelt, insatiable, undeniable desires met in the gospel of Jesus Christ, and only there. You refuse to believe that message and live for him. Remember when I told you at the very beginning of this that you were created through him and for him. You continue aiming your heart. You continue aiming your appetites at everything else other than him. You return to dust. There's a passage in Psalm chapter 2. It says that the nations rage and the peoples plot in vain, the rulers of the earth. You know what's interesting about that? We think about that, and ultimately what they're raging and plotting is they want to burst God's ropes and chains off of them. You know how that applies to you? You guys aren't rulers of the earth and kings and all those various things. You know how that applies though? You know, the symbolism here for you is God's word, God's commandment that you hate, that you don't want to live for. You rage and you plot in vain, trying to burst it off, not knowing that no matter what, you're going to come back under at the end. And you'll have to give an account for what you've done with it. Jesus says that he finds his true fullness, his true satisfaction in doing the will of the Father. And I promise you now, you will not find it anywhere else. but in Christ and living for your Father. And so let me just say this. Let me leave you with a quote from C.S. Lewis, really quickly. And I just want this quote, I want it to resonate in your mind. I want it to sink down in your heart. And I would hope, listen, I would hope that this would be a filter through which you look at everything you pursue in life. Everything. If I find in myself a desire that nothing in this world can satisfy, the only reasonable explanation is that I was made for another world. I'm going to read that one more time. If I find in myself a desire that nothing in this world can satisfy, the only reasonable explanation is that I was made for another world. Let's pray. Father, if I could ask you for anything tonight, if I could ask you for one thing, it would be that